Hello everyone and welcome back to the series. In today's video, we're going to be learning asynchronous programming in Python, and we're going to utilize the Aiter function in Python to do our asynchronous programming. And so guys, if you are new to Python or if you are looking to expand your knowledge about asynchronous programming, this video is perfect for you. Throughout the video, we're going to be looking at real life usage of the Aiter function, and we're going to try our hands-on exercises, and towards the end of the video I'm going to show my solutions with you. But what exactly is Aiter function and what do we use it for? Let's understand it. This is a very powerful built-in function that was introduced in Python version 3.10, and the purpose is for asynchronous programming. It will return asynchronous iterator for asynchronous iterable object. All right, guys. So let's first of all take a look at the syntax of the aiter function. All right. So before I do that, let's head towards my desktop, and I'm gonna create a folder here. I'm gonna call it aiter. Okay, so let's call it aiter. All right. So from here, I'm going to open VS Code like so. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a bit. I'll go to File. And then I'm just going to open a new folder. So here I go to my desktop, and then I'm going to load this folder into VS Code. That's perfect. All right, so here let's create. Okay, I'm gonna create a new file, and this file I'm gonna call it aiter.py. That's perfect. Okay, guys, so Python aiter function takes a single argument, and this argument is going to be the async iterable object. So if you want to run it, the syntax, let's have a look at it actually. So aiter, then you're gonna pass in a single argument, and this argument is going to be the async iterable object. All right, so this is going to be the async iterable. So the aiter function is going to take a single argument, and it's going to be the async iterable object. And it's going to iterate over the object. All right, so we are going to be exploring some examples of this, but there is a framework we have to follow. First of all, let's take a look at an example. In this example, we are going to take a basic usage of the aiter function in Python. So we are going to be creating a synchronous number generator function. And this is going to actually generate numbers from 0 to 4, and it's going to have a delay of 1 second between each number generation. All right, so I'm going to comment this one out quick. First of all, there is a framework we are going to follow in this example. We want to write a Python script that is going to generate numbers, but it has to utilize the aiter function to make the generation of the number asynchronous. Between each number generation, there's going to be a 1 second delay. All right, so to do this, first of all, let's follow this framework. First of all, we are going to import async.io, and this async.io is a Python model that provides framework for writing asynchronous code. So when we import it, let's follow it. So you're going to import async.io right there. Then from there, we go to the next thing that we have to do, that is redefining our, we have to define our asynchronous number generator. Let me go down a bit here. So we're going to say, in Python, when you want to define a function, you use the def keyword. That is to say that you are defining a function. So we say def, and we're going to call it async underscore number generator. And we know the function is in Python, functions can take an argument depending on what you are doing. So here we are not going to take any argument, but we say define asynchronous function. So we're going to begin with async. That is to say that the function is asynchronous. Then once we have defined it, we're going to have a look at a range of numbers we want to loop through. So we're going to use the for loop for number. I'm going to call each number in range, and then we're going to say range of 5. So what we are saying right now is that for a number in range of 5, so our application is going to start from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we get 5 numbers right there. So we are saying for numbers in range of 1, 0 to 5, let's yield a number. We're going to bring out each number. Once we have done that, the next thing to do is we're going to await. I'm going to go up a bit. Let's await. What this essentially means is that we're going to simulate asynchronous operations. So we use async io dot sleep, and we pass in the number of seconds we want to sleep. So we are going to say that we want to sleep for 1 second. We pass it in right there. So once we are done with this part, we can move to create asynchronous iterator using the Aiter function. We now want to utilize the built-in function called the Aiter to iterate over the numbers that are coming, that are being yielded from this place, the range of numbers, the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want to iterate through this, and we want to convert it to asynchronous iterator. So we use async, and we define a function called main. This main is not going to take any argument. Then here we say async. We are talking about async operation. So async, then we say for number in. Then what are we going to do? We're going to call this function back. We're going to call this function. But remember, what we really want to do is to convert it or use the Aiter to iterate over it. So we say Aiter, then we're going to pass this function, the one that we created before, as an argument to it. Then what we can do right here is to print, and we're going to print what? Number. All right, guys, let me explain it. So here we imported async io, then we defined a function, and we said from the range, for every number in the range of 5, we are going to yield a number. So when we yield each number, we sleep 1 second. The application is going to sleep 1 second. And then from there, we define a main function, and then we loop through all the numbers that are being yielded here. Then we print that number, but we pass those numbers to the async Aiter function, and then we print it here. From here, the last step to do is to run the event loop. And how we run it, we call async io dot run. And what are we running? We're going to run the function called main. All right, that is perfect. That is all that you need to do. Let me save it and locate this button here. Run it, and let's see. So first 0, it came to 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. All right, so you could see that it's actually sleeping. The application is sleeping every second. We can choose to increase it if you want to make the sleep more obvious to maybe 3. Save it, and then you run it. Let's see. 0, it's waited for 3 seconds, then 2, 3, 4. Perfect. All right, guys, so this is how to do it using a Aiter to generate numbers asynchronously. So let's move to the next example. I'm going to create a new file here. And then in the next example, we are going to be dealing with asynchronous data processor. So let's say, let me call the file, the script, data processor.py. All right, guys, you can call it anything. And we are going to be following the same framework. So we said first we have to import async IO. What essentially we're going to be doing is that we want to pick data from somewhere. We don't know what the data is going to be, but we're going to load this data. And the assumption is that this data is going to be very large to an extent that if we don't use asynchronous programming or Aiter, it's going to make our application freeze. So when the application freezes until Python is downloading the data, your application cannot be responsive. But that is something that we want to avoid. So let's implement this. First is to import, and you're going to be importing async IO. From there, we're going to be defining the asynchronous data processor to load the data. So we begin with async, and then like how you would normally define a function in Python, we say def, and the name of the function, let's call it data processor. Data processor or anything that you want, data processor. Okay. From here, we're going to be passing an argument. We're going to be loading the data. So the function, when you run it, it is expected that you provide a list of data to it. So let's say data. Now, we are going to use our for loop to iterate through the data. So we're going to say that for maybe item in data, what do we want to do? We want to yield every item. So you're going to say yield item. And from there, we want to simulate a sleep or asynchronous. We want to simulate that. So we want to say that await, and the application is going to wait for how long? So we say async IO dot sleep. How long do we want the application to sleep? This time around, we say 2 seconds. From there, we want to print. So we want to print, say print. Okay, so we pass something like processed and how we pass the item to it. All right, so this is all that we want to do at this part. From here, let's define our next function, which is going to be our main function, utilizing the Aiter function. So we say async, and then we call def to make sure that we are defining a function. We define a function, we call it main. All right. So here, we're gonna also be calling our data processor function that we created above. So we say async for item, for info, let's say info in Aiter of what, then we're gonna copy this function. That is what we are calling. Because data is loaded over here, it has been yielded. But we want to pass this data, the result of this function, to the Aiter function to iterate over it. So we paste it here. Because it's a function, we have to run it. And then the next thing to do is to print this. But guys, remember that the data processor function here requires an argument. So for now, just to get rid of the error, let me say pass. That is going to indicate to Python that we don't want to do anything. It actually gets rid of the error. But the function here is going to request for data. It's compulsory. It's not an optional parameter. You have to pass a data to it. So you have to define a data here. And what we're going to do is called a variable called data. And this data is going to be a list of numbers. Let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. This is what we want to pass. Then from here, we pass that data here to it. We are not going to print anything here because this function, the main function, is actually calling the data processor, and this data processor actually prints something. That is all that we need to do. And it's going to utilize the async.sleep to sleep for 2 seconds. Once we are done with this part, the next thing to do is to run the application. So we say async io dot run, and we're going to run which function? The main function. So this main function is also going to call this function. So in total, our application runs all the functions here. All right, guys, so let's run and see the output. So processed 1, 2, 3, 4, then it's gonna quit. So it's actually utilizing a sleep of 2 seconds in each. Let's utilize the first example. What we did, we used a range function. Okay, so let's say our data is equal to range, and we're gonna pass in what? 5. And this data is then passed to the data processor function here. Let's write and see what happens. Okay, let's look down here. Process 0, 1, 2, 3, and it stops at 4. All right, so to get the same data like what we have over here, we're gonna pass 1 space, and then 5, we're gonna change it to 6. Let's run and then see. Okay, so look at it here. Processed 1, 2, perfect. So guys, that is how to do it. In the next example, we're gonna be simulating asynchronous user authentication checker. So I'm gonna create a new file here and call it maybe authentication. In this example, we want to have a list of users. So the users are going to have a name, that is the username, and then they are going to have authentication status. So it's going to be true or false. If it is true, that means the person has been authenticated. If it is false, the person has not been authenticated. And what we're going to do is use the async Aiter function to do it asynchronously, so that in case the data size is large or heavy, it's not going to lead to our application being frozen or not responsive. So this is the data, the list of users we are going to talk about. Each user is having a key called username, and it maps to the name of the person or the username of the person, and there is an authentication status, which is either true or false. So this is the data we're going to be using. Let me comment that. I'm going to comment it. Okay, so let's come down here. First, we're going to import async IO. So import, guys, let me get rid of this data first. Okay, so import. But before everything, let me rename the file here. I should have brought .py. Okay, so this one is now perfect. First is to import async IO. Import, and we're gonna import async IO. Then from here, we're gonna define our asynchronous authentication checker. So like we did in the previous examples, we say async just to make sure that the function we are running is async function. But just to make it a function, we say def, and we're going to define a function called async user maybe checker. That's how I'm going to call mine. Then inside the function, we're going to pass in users as a list of users or the data we want to load. So we say users, that is how we are calling it. And after we have passed this, we're going to start with our normal for loop. We say for user, for every user. Let me paste the data again, the list of users for you to see. So this is what I want us to do. This is our users. All right, guys, I have commented it out. This one also. Okay, so these are our list of users, and we are loading this data. It could be 10,000, it could be 1,000,000 users we are loading into the application. So we load it here, and we're gonna say that for user in users, the variable that was passed as an argument. So users. So for this, what we want to do is first yield every user, yield user, and then we're gonna simulate a pause. Okay, so we could make it like, okay, the application is gonna sleep for the loading of the data is gonna sleep for maybe 2 seconds, where we say await, and we're gonna await. We use async io dot sleep. Then we're gonna sleep for, let's say, 2 seconds. From there, we want to make an if condition. We're gonna check that if a user is authenticated. So if user, which is a variable here, passed, we are iterating through it, and if a user is authenticated. So when we come here, we are seeing the users as a list, but inside the list we have dictionary, and how we access the key of a dictionary, we use the square bracket, and we say that if a user is authenticated, so we're gonna go through each users, and we're gonna go to the key that says authenticated. I'm gonna pick the authenticated and pass it to this one. So if user is authenticated, what it essentially means is that if a user has authentication status of true, then what we're going to do is to print that user. So we're going to print that maybe user, and then we're going to go for the username of the person. So how do we get access to our username? The same user, but this time around the username. So I'm going to copy this one here and then say, but in place of authenticated, I'm going to say username, name, username. Then we're going to say that it's authenticated. We're going to call it something like this. So if user, the authentication status of the user is true, then we're going to say user, then it gets the username of the person, like maybe this, and then it's going to say that is authenticated. Okay, so is authenticated. Else we can say that we can print this same thing, but this time around you're gonna say user, then the name of the user is not authenticated. Perfect. So this is going to be our async user checker, or you can call it anything like login or whatever it is. Then from here we're going to define our asynchronous iterator using the Aiter function. That is where we say async, and you're going to say def. We're going to define the main function. The main function doesn't take any argument, and this is the time we define our users, because we are going to be calling this function like so. Okay, so First, let's call the function. So you're gonna say async, and for user in this very function. And we all know that the function requires what? Users as a parameter. So we have to define a user variable that contains all the list of users right here. And because this one is commented out, I'm gonna uncomment it like so. Okay. So this users is now gonna be a variable that is passed to the async user generator like so. Let me say pass here, pass. Okay, async for user in async generator users. Okay, so right from here, what we have to do is to use the aiter, and we pass, wrap it around like so. All right, so we were seeing that error because of the indentation. Users were pushed in like this, which is having an indentation error. So you bring it back like that. All right, so now that we have actually finished with this part, it's left with the final piece where we have to run our application. So we say async io dot run, and we're gonna run the main function. That's if there are no errors, we have to see that it goes through the data and bring every user out, saying that the user, and then it comes with the username, like first user Techi is authenticated. Then it's gonna wait for 2 seconds and go to the user Musa is, or the authentication status is, let's say, not authenticated. That is how it's gonna be. So I'm going to run it very quick here. All right, so look at it down here. User Techi is authenticated. Musa is not, because when you look at the data here, Musa is not authenticated. Then it goes through to Ryan, who is supposed to be authenticated. Good. And Haida is also authenticated, because Haida has an authentication status of what? True. Then Fadila authentication is false. Fadila is not authenticated. Adam, then it's gonna loop through the whole data. So guys, the point of this whole aiter function thing is to make sure that if the quantity or the size of the data you are loading is very huge, Python is gonna wait, load all the data in, and at the time of the loading, it's gonna be unresponsive. It's not gonna be responsive. You cannot do anything with your application. Your application is gonna be in a queue waiting for that data to be loaded. Only then will it continue loading the data. But if you look at it here, we are loading all this bunch of data into the system. The system first loaded Tachi, and then it waited for 2 seconds, then came back and then did that processing. And at the time that it was waiting for the 2 seconds, the application wasn't just idle. It was just giving us a feedback as to how it is loading the data. It's giving us something like a progress bar for you to see how what it is doing. Let's run it one more time. Tachi, it loaded it, came back, gave us this one. It's loading the data asynchronously. But in traditional programming, it's gonna load all the data in at once. So if it takes like 1 hour to do the loading, you have to watch your computer for 1 hour for it to load the data. All right, so let me clear the screen. Perfect. All right, so guys, the next one we are going to be doing is an exercise for you. Let me do this, be in the full screen here. But before that, I'm going to read a question for you. You try it based on the examples that we have solved. I think you have all the knowledge to solve this particular exercise. From there, I will show you my solution. So the objective of the exercise is for you to understand how we use the aiter function to create a synchronous iterator and iterate over a message, a list of messages asynchronously. So maybe after completing this task, you should be able to gain a hands-on knowledge on how to work with asynchronous or aiter function like we have done. So guys, I really think that you should be able to do this. All right, so let me tell you what you are going to do. This is the exercise on the screen. Given a list of messages between two brothers, Ryan and Haida, create a synchronous message sender function that simulates sending messages asynchronously with a 2-second delay between each message. All right, so on the screen is the messages that went through back and forth between the two brothers. And then this is the instruction on your screen. First of all, you have to define a synchronous message sender function and you name it async message sender. And this is going to take an argument messages, much like what we did in the user authentication checker, where it was actually requesting for the list of users. This time around, the async message sender is going to request for messages, list of messages. It's going to take that as an argument. And inside the async sender, you have to iterate over each message in the messages. And you simulate sending each message with a synchronous, sleep of 2 seconds. You introduce it. So when the first message is sent, it takes 2 seconds for the person to reply. And from there, you're going to print each message that is being sent. Then from there, you're going to create a synchronous iterator using the aiter function like we did. And then you define the main function. From inside the main function, you're going to create a list of messages that is being passed. And from there, you're going to loop through the messages and you print every message. All right, guys. So I highly recommend that you go through the previous examples, especially with the one with the authentication checker. Is similar. And from there, you're going to implement it. So pause the video, try it, and compare your solution. All right, guys, so let's do this. First, I'm going to create a file, and I'm going to call it messages sender.py. All right. So I'm going to close all these ones. Open the message sender. The first instruction is always to import async IO. So import async IO. From there, we're going to define our asynchronous message sender function. So we say async, and we use the def to let Python know that it's a function that we are defining. And we're going to call it async underscore message sender. And this is actually going to take list of messages as input. So the function is going to load bunch of messages. We have no idea how big the message is going to be, but we know it's going to be big enough to make our application responsive. That's why we are using the aiter function to make it responsive all the time. Perfect. So we say we have to loop over the messages. So we say for, and then we say message in messages. All right. So this is where I'm getting the messages from. The messages has been passed as an argument. So wherever we call this function, we are expecting to pass a list of messages to it. Then we say for each message in the list of messages, we're going to be bringing out each message. So yield, we're going to yield message. From there, we have to simulate a sleep of 2 seconds to make it seem like the person sent, it took 2 seconds for the person to send message back. So we say await, and we're gonna await. We say async io dot sleep, and we're gonna sleep for 2 seconds. You can make it however long you want. And once we've done that, we're gonna print the message. We're gonna print that we now have to print the message. Now we have access to the individual messages, but I want to show you how the message list is going to be. This is going to be the list of the messages. Sorry about that. Let me paste it one more time. So you're going to have a list of messages, and the individual messages are like this. This person says, hey, how is it going? And the person respond, I'm good, thanks, and all that. So this is the messages we are going to pass. So when you look at the individual message, we are going to have a key called name, and we're also going to have a key called message. So we have to be able to bring out that. So we're going to print, and we're going to say message. You use square bracket to access the key, the name. So we're going to say name. All right. So that's how it's going to be. I bring a comma and something like this. So the person will say, and in front of that, we're going to pass the message that the person sent. So we say message, and we use a square bracket to access the key called message. All right, that's perfect. If this part sounds confusing, what I'm trying to do is that we use this function, load in the messages, then we will go through the messages line by line, line by line. So the first one is going to be message, and this message has in it name and the content of the message. We could probably name this one to content, but we have the name, which talks about the person sending the message or the sender. And we have the message that is going to be the content, what the person is trying to send over to the person. So our application is going to go through the list of the messages, and it's going to yield, it's going to bring out these messages one by one. But when it brings out the first message, it's going to wait for 2 seconds. This is actually simulating an actual application, or let's say a message sender, something like WhatsApp, where the person takes some time to WhatsApp. And this is the amount of time it's actually going to do that. And once it's wait for 2 seconds, it's going to print the name of the sender and what the person is sending. That message is going to bring this one. Perfect. So once we are done with this, we're going to move to the next one where we define the asynchronous iterator using the Aiter function. All this while we are not using the Aiter function. This is the part. So we say async just to make sure that the function we are defining is asynchronous. Async, and we say def, and we're gonna call the function main. So from here, we're gonna call the function main, and from here we're gonna define our messages. But before we even define the messages, we're gonna say async then we say for message in. And what are we talking about? We're gonna bring our Aiter function for message in, then we call this asynchronous message sender. We pass it to the Aiter function just to make sure that it loops over the data and make sure our application doesn't get frozen in the middle of the execution. Then we all know that it requires an argument called message. You can call it anything, but I'm gonna call it messages. But when I run this right away, it's gonna return an error saying that message is not defined. Let's try to actually simulate this error for you to see if I do not define it. So from here, we're gonna pass. We are not going to do anything. Let me comment this one out, and you're going to see the error that comes. Now, that's how we run the application. We say async io dot run, and we are going to run our main application. So everything is supposed to be right, with the exception of it telling us messages is not defined. Of course, it is not defined too. So I just want you to know the challenges you're going to face if you don't define a message. So all right, guys, so right away when we run this application, we should have an error saying that messages are not defined. Let's try that and see. Messages are not defined. Let me do that one more time. And we are getting name messages are not defined. That is because the function is actually expecting messages. It has been passed, but it has not been defined. So I'm going to put the messages here. Let me bring in the messages real quick and put in the messages over here. So let's save it, and hopefully everything should work just fine. Okay, so hey, how is it going? Then it takes 2 seconds for him to reply. It goes like that. That is perfect. So this is actually using a synchronous programming. It is using the Aiter function. After the data has been loaded, it iterates over the data, and from there it loads the data. So it doesn't matter how hard or how big the size of the data is, it's actually going to keep our application running smoothly. Guys, this is actually impressive. Let's run it one more time to see the output. So it's going to run. Ryan says, hey, how is it going? Then Haida says, that's how it's going to do it. It's really, really nice. So please compare. If you had it correct, that's fine. But in case you had some issues, just use my solution as a guide. Let me show you the solution. Let me go over it once more. So it says async IO. You have to import it. Then you define a function called async message sender, but it's an asynchronous function. So you bring async. Then it's gonna be taking an input of messages. Now that you have access to the messages, you're gonna go through all the messages one by one and say for message in messages, you're gonna bring out the message, you're gonna yield it like this. Then you pause. The application is gonna pause for 2 seconds. Then it's gonna print the message. Then we define our main function and we call the function that we have defined at the top, the loader or the sender function, which takes in the messages here. But because it's a synchronous, we have to make it a synchronous function. Then right after that, we say async.run. Then we run our application. So this is how it looks like. All right, guys, so let's go through example 5. What we essentially gonna do is to write a Python script. And this script uses a synchronous file reader, which is going to read a file at a specified location on our computer. When it reads it, it's assumed that the file contains a lot of text or whatever it is. But the size of the application, the size of the file could be large. So we want to use Aiter or the asynchronous function, built-in function in Python, to read each line, and then it's going to pause for 1 second. So it's going to read all of it. Let's see how to do that. First is to create a script, or let's name it file underscore reader dot reader dot py. All right, this is going to be our file. And like we have been doing all the time, we first need to import our async module. So we say import, and we're going to import async IO. From there, we're going to define our asynchronous file reader. So we say async, and we use the def keyword to tell Python that we are defining a function. So we say async underscore maybe reader. Then it's going to be expecting the path of a file. So we say file underscore path. So that will be the location on our computer where the file is maybe located. So that's where it's going to be. And then we're going to loop through the files. So we say with open to open the file. So we're going to pass the file path, which is this right here. We're going to pass the file path, and we're going to do that in the read mode. So say R to be the read mode, and we're going to call it as file. You can call it anything, make it something descriptive. So we're going to use a while loop. So it's going to go through the file, and while there is a text or something in the file that you have loaded, it's going to continue to be in that kind of loop, continuous loop, finite loop, until it hits the bottom where there is nothing in the file. All right, so now we have opened the file in the read mode, and it's going to go through all the things in the file, and then it's going to read everything, report everything to us. So we say while true. So while true, let's say line is equal to, whilst there is something, there is a text. In our case, we are going to load a text file. So whilst there is a text in the file, we're going to say line is equal to file, which is the variable defined here. Let's copy this variable. File, then dot, we're going to read line. We're going to read line dot strip. So in case there are maybe white spaces around it, maybe there are spaces in front of the line or spaces after the line, we're going to split it. And once we have done that, we say if not line, that is when there is nothing inside the file, or when we have gotten to the bottom of the file, we're going to break out of the for loop. Then we're going to yield the line which we have defined. So it's going to go through the line. Open the file. So here we open the file in read mode. And whilst there are text inside the file, we're going to read the lines one by one. But the white spaces in front and after, we're going to strip them off. But as we are reading through, eventually we're going to get into the bottom of the file. So once we get to the bottom of the file where there is no text to read, or when we open and there's nothing inside the file to read, we're going to break out of the while loop. Then we're going to yield it. But don't forget that we also want to simulate. Guys, let me close this. We also want to simulate a sleep. So we say await, and we're going to wait for let's say 1 second. So we're going to say async IO dot sleep, and we're going to sleep for 1 second. All right, perfect. So the next thing to do is to use Aiter function to iterate over the content of the file. So we're going to say async, and we're going to say def define the main function. And inside the main function, we say async. We use the async for loop. So for line in Aiter, then we're gonna pass this function, which requires a file path, just like this, to it. Now the file path has not been defined, so we're gonna say, okay, I'm gonna define the file path here. Sorry. So let's say example. Okay, let's say my underscore. How do I even call it? Let's say example.txt. Okay. But guys, don't forget that this file doesn't exist. Let me print line. Print. And we're gonna print what? Line here. But before we even do it, we have to make sure that this file actually exists. So I'm gonna go to my desktop. Inside the Aiter folder, that is where our file reader is going to be. So right here, I'm just gonna say new, then it's a text file. Click on it here, then we call it example.txt. Perfect. This is what we have done. Let's write some content because it has to read what is inside the txt file. So I'm gonna say, hello guys, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. Okay, that's perfect. Then I'm gonna save this. Perfect. Okay, so now we have defined we have looped through it using the Aiter function. The next thing to do is to run our application. So we say async io dot run, and we're gonna run our application. We're gonna run the main function, which also calls this function. All right, guys. So if everything goes as planned, if there are no mistakes, we have to be able to read our file. So I'm gonna click on run like that. Okay, so let's see. We are having no such file at example.txt. Okay, so I'm gonna have to come here, example.txt. Let me check the file extension. Okay. I'm gonna clear my screen, run it one more time. Hello guys, welcome to my channel. Please subscribe. Okay, so there's something I have to tell you. I had the error example.txt. It told me there was no file because I made it example.txt. So it was actually expecting that I pass in example.txt. So that is when I went back and cleared the txt. Okay, so guys, that is all for that. If you found this tutorial very helpful, please like and share the video. Leave a comment in the comment section, and guys, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated. It's actually gonna help me with the YouTube algorithm for people to also see my video. I'm gonna see you in the next video. Thank you.